Hello, it is time for a writer's workshop. Ms. Alpine here again, and today we're going to be talking about the 6 traits of writing, and we're going to focus on conventions. So we have already discussed 5 out of the 6 traits of writing, and today will be our last trait that we need to learn about, and that, of course, is conventions. So what are conventions? Basically, conventions are what makes your writing easy to read and understandable. Without conventions, man, we would be so confused as a reader. So what's included are things like making sure you use capital letters at the beginning of a sentence. Make sure that you use punctuation at the end of each sentence. You definitely want to look at making sure your words are spelled correctly. And when we get further into creating multiple paragraphs in our writing, we also want to make sure that we include indentions in our paragraph. And if you're like, what does that even mean? Don't worry, we're going to get there. But as you can see, conventions is all about the grammar and the usage in our writing. So you've been doing this for a long time. I know in first grade and in second grade, your teachers would always ask you, did you capitalize the first word of every sentence? Did you put punctuation at the end of every sentence? And are you double checking and trying your best to spell your words as correct as you can? Well, if you've been doing that, guess what? You've already been doing the trait of conventions. So I have a couple examples over here. And this first one right here, we see it's the same sentence, but we see a few different errors in it. And the first one says, I saw a bird in a big tree. Well, I kind of think they mean I saw a bird. And so you would just have to fix that. What about the second one? I saw a bird in big tree. Wait, that sounds pretty confusing, right? So it looks like they just have to flip these 2 words here. The next one, I saw a bird in a tree big. Uh-oh, another mistake. And so what we want to do is we want to just go back and make the changes to fix it. And finally, oh man, I see this all the time. I saw a bird in big tree. Well, first off, this I is a lowercase I. Please, please, please remember, every time you're talking about I is a proper noun. When that's standing on its own, it's a proper noun, which means it always has to be capitalized. And then again, bird is just spelled wrong. And I think we're also missing another word here. I saw a bird in a big tree. So sometimes we might leave out some words as well. And so those are just some examples of how we want to make sure we go back and double check our work, and we're proofreading and editing to check for any of those mistakes. And that's all part of conventions. Now, the second example here that I have is just a paragraph that someone wrote. But look at this. First off, I don't see any capitalized words. And I hardly see any, well, there's no periods or question marks or exclamation. Where's that punctuation? And I don't know if I necessarily see any spelling errors, but there's a lot of things wrong here. Imagine if you're trying to read this. It would sound like this. One hot morning, when Mary Lennox was 9 years old, she had a strange feeling that something was wrong. From her room, she heard shouts and cries and the patter of hurrying feet, but no one came to her. She lay back on her bed and fell asleep. When she woke, the house was silent. Still no one came. Oh my gosh, I can't keep up, because a period tells us, hey, we need to stop and take a breath. And there was not even one single period here. And so not only did I not get to breathe, but it also made it pretty confusing when you go to read this. So again, conventions is really about going back and editing and making sure that we have capital letters where it's needed, punctuation where it's needed, and correct spelling. Just like we've done with other traits, we are going to see this trait of convention in an author's published piece of work. And this one's kind of fun. Not only are we going to see it, but we're going to see what happens if we take out some of those conventions. If the writing didn't have punctuation, man, it would be really confusing, like we said. And we're going to take a look at this story. As you're watching it, just really pay attention to see how important the punctuation is.
Day after day, the punctuation marks showed up in Mr. Wright's classroom. Day after day, they did their jobs. They put up with being erased and replaced and corrected and ignored and moved around. Then, on the hottest, stickiest day the class had ever seen, right in the middle of a lesson about commas, Mr. Wright mopped his forehead and said, "Let's give punctuation a vacation." As the kids cheered and headed for the playground to cool off, the punctuation marks stared at one another in disbelief. "Is this the thanks we get?" asked a question mark. "Well," puffed an exclamation point. Now, said a comma. "We should take a vacation," said a period. "They'll soon learn how much they need us." "It's 11 o'clock now," said a colon. "Let's leave at 11:02. "Great," said an exclamation point. "Don't leave without us," yelled the apostrophes. Whoosh! Punctuation rushed out the door. Whoosh! They rushed back in to grab the quotation marks, who were too busy talking to pay attention. When Mr. Wright's class returned from the playground, they couldn't wait to find out what happened in Chapter 4 of their book, Ace Scooper, Dog Detective. Mr. Wright opened his mouth to read aloud, but then he stopped and stared. "This is weird. The punctuation is missing. Uh-oh, where could it be? Yikes, maybe punctuation took a vacation. We are in big trouble now." Mr. Wright was right. Nothing made sense without punctuation. Do you miss us? How much? Why couldn't we take a vacation sooner? Guess who? A couple of days later, the school secretary delivered a small bundle of postcards to Mr. Wright's class. They were postmarked, "Take a break, Lake." We flop, we plop, we stop, we stay put in our lounge chairs. We are happy thinking our complete thoughts. Thoughtfully, your sentence stoppers. Dear friends, swimming, sailing, sunning, soaring, water skiing. Next time, we must remember bug spray, toothpaste, flashlight, water shoes. Sincerely, list makers. Greetings to Mr. Wright's class. This postcard doesn't take the place of a letter. If anybody takes the place of a letter, that's us. It's our job. We know we're possessive, but that's the way we are. Don't forget us while we're gone. Substitutes. A big hello from Vacation Paradise, where the water is as clear as a well-punctuated sentence. We talk all day, we talk all night. Too busy talking to write any more. The Yakety Yaks. Kids, writing this on schedule at 1:15, yummy lunch at 11:55, going swimming at 3 o'clock sharp, the timekeepers. Wow, what a ride! You should try tubing. Scary, fun. Yikes, hold on. We want mommy! Emotional us. The kids guessed who wrote the postcards, and they wanted to write back, but they couldn't write without punctuation. The best they could do was borrow some from Mr. Rongo's class next door, where punctuation seemed to be running wild. Dear punctuation, please come back. We need you. We miss you too. Life at school is difficult without you. We can't do reading, writing, or riddles without punctuation. Chapter 4 of our book, Ace Scooper, doesn't make sense. We will never take punctuation for granted again. Won't you please come back before 10 on Friday? Mr. Wright says, punctuation, please come home. Sincerely, Mr. Wright's class. So the punctuation marks returned to Mr. Wright's classroom to do the job only they could do. Mr. Rongo's unruly punctuation scrambled back to their own classroom. We have so much to tell you. Who did you miss the most? It's good to be back in Mr. Wright's class. Commas, periods, exclamation points, question marks, colons, apostrophes, quotation marks. Take your places. 10 o'clock a.m. Time to study us.
Okay, so let me get back in here. So that was a fun story, but it's true. Imagine if we didn't have punctuation. It'd be really hard to understand what writers are writing. So let's reflect back and take a look at, reflect back to that story. And the first thing we want to ask is, did the author use capitalization correctly? Did they capitalize the beginning of each word, or did he? And he did. Now, I put here an example where it says like, great, said the exclamation point. Don't leave us, or don't leave without us, yelled the apostrophes. And if you see, there is a capital at the beginning of each of these sentences, and the author does that throughout. Now, does each sentence contain punctuation? Well, before the punctuation marks actually took a vacation, they did. And again, we can see this here. We have some periods, we have exclamation points. And so it did have correct punctuation before the punctuation actually took the vacation. And was the spelling correct? It sure was. I didn't see one spelling error when the author was writing with the correct punctuation. So for today's assignment, you're going to go back to your Google Classroom. And for your journal entry today, it's going to be a little bit different than what you've been doing in the past. Instead of you actually writing your own journal entry, you're going to be fixing a journal entry. And so you're going to read this journal and you're going to fix all the mistakes you can find. So let's go in and take a look at what that's going to look like. So the journal entry is just one that I found. I'm going to go right here. And it starts off like this. At the start of school, Dora was afraid of her new teacher. Mrs. Davis seemed nice, but she had so many rules for the class to follow. As the school year continued, Dora began to understand how the teacher came up with the rules. The rules were there so students would be respectful of themselves and each other. By the end of the year, Dora thought Mrs. Davis was the best teacher she ever had. Okay, it's pretty good, but there are definitely mistakes. So I'm going to ask you to make sure you look for spelling errors, capitalization errors, and punctuation. And remember, if we see this red squiggly, we definitely see there's a problem with spelling right there. And it points it out for us. So figure out how can we spell that correctly, but keep looking for any capitalizations if we're missing some, and where do we need some extra punctuation. And I even gave you a hint. There are 10 mistakes that you can fix overall. And if you know how to highlight, I'm going to show you too. You might want to make sure that if you make any kind of, if you fix anything, for example, I know this word is spelled wrong, many, and I'm even going to give you one of the tips right here. Many should only have one N, right? And if you made that change and you fixed it, you might want to scroll down and highlight that word. And then what we could do right up here at the top is highlight color. And you can choose a color that you want to highlight to say, Miss Alpine, or whoever your teacher is, say, I fixed that. And if you anything that you fix, if you want to, again, click on it, let's say you fix this, click on it, come up here to highlight. You can choose a color to highlight it to say that that is something that you fixed. So when you go back, you can see if you actually fixed 10 mistakes. All right, that's it for me today. Let's go be writers.